Okay, this shir is for the Triennial Cycle, our Triennial Cycle Parshat, or Sidra, rather, 30 of Sefer Bereshit, which continues the story of Yosef Atzadik. And the springboard in the Sidra for the halachic topic this week is that Yaakov Avinu, when he sees that there is no food in the land of Canaan, but there is food in Eretz Yisrael, sends his sons down in order to find food. And the topic of this shir is the concept of a prohibition of leaving Eretz Yisrael. What is the nature of this prohibition? What are the boundaries of the prohibition? And it's also appropriate, apart from the fact that it fits with the Triennial Cycle this week. It is, of course, also Israeli Independence Day today, which celebrates the date He'iyah, though it isn't He'iyah, when the leadership of the Zionist Yeshuv in Eretz Yisrael declared an independent state. And also, by extension, the success in the civil war against the Arab population of Mandate Palestine, as it was at the time, which had been going on for nearly a year by the time of the declaration, and the subsequent war against the 5 nations, or 6 if you count Lebanon, who subsequently invaded as a result of the Declaration of Independence. And without going into the very, very long topic of the nature of Zionism and its relationship to Judaism, one thing that is for sure true, and there is no doubt about it, is that if there had never been a Zionist movement, or Kol v'chomer, if there had been a Zionist movement but it had failed, or it had lost the war of 1947 to 1948, there is no doubt that many, many, many fewer Jews would be living in Eretz Yisrael today, including, though not limited to, religious Jews, than do today. There's almost no way that I would be living in Eretz Yisrael, which I'm very privileged to do. And given that the Zionist militias and then the IDF, as it became, were triumphed under very challenging and difficult circumstances during those 2 years of war, you have to say, David Ben-Gurion and the gang, well done, good on you. You did a good job in that war. And of course, I'll permit myself to say one thing, which is that why did they do so well under those very, very difficult circumstances which they faced? And the answer is that in the Zionist Yeshuv, whatever else you might want to say about their character and morals and religiosity or lack of it, one thing that was certainly true, it was a very high capital human movement. It was a community and a political organization, political structure in which intelligence and competence and the ability to get things done and do them well was very, very highly prized. And incompetent, crazy people who just get in the way and are useless were swiftly removed from any kind of position where they could do any harm, as opposed to other times, you could say, when incompetent people and crazy people and low-life criminals and multiply convicted criminals are allowed to form the government of the country, and the predictable results are that they don't do a very good job of it. And we'll just leave it at say, the Hamavin Yavin. But of course, the one who is not a Mavin will not Yavin, and as Mishlei says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so does a fool return to his folly. And given that we live in a democracy, and the fools outweigh the Mavinim, that's probably what's going to happen. Anyway, let's look at different sources to do with not so much the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael, although they will discuss that, but specifically we're looking at the issa of leaving Eretz Yisrael. And this is an interesting topic, not just because for many people, it's an extremely relevant halacha. I'm going, Emes Hashem, everything goes well, I'm going to visit friends and family in England, my birth country, this summer. So if there is a Issa to leave Eretz Yisrael, obviously that would be very relevant to me. It's also an interesting topic because it's a case where comparing parallel sources and dependent sources in the Yerushalmi and the Bavli, or the Yerushalmi and the Tosefta, is actually a very instructive and rewarding experience. Very illustrative, although probably not illustrative of what most people would assume when I say that. But what I mean by that will become clear in due course. So we're going to start with the the second source on the source sheet put together by my good friend Josh Friedman, who put together the source sheet for this week, and who is the Yozem behind the whole concept of the Sidra B'Halacha enterprise. And the Tosefta, it is a Tosefta in Avodah Zarah, which is a long halacha. Although I looked up in Ktav Yad, there's only two of them today, and at least according to one of them, Ktav Yad Vienna, the reason why it's quite such a long halacha is that it actually should be multiple halachas. But in any case, that doesn't really matter. According to the standard printed editions, we're looking at Tosefta Avodah Zarah, Perek Hey, Halacha Bet. Okay, and it says as follows: Yishra Adam be'Eretz Yisrael afilu be'ir sheruba of the Kochavim, it should say Goyim, v'lo b'chutz la'aretz afilu be'ir shekula Yisrael. So a man should live. Yishra is a slightly odd term for live, kind of be immersed, kind of be sunk into, but it's just translated. A man should live in Eretz Yisrael, even in a city that is a majority Goyim, and not in Chutz La'aretz, even in a city that is majority Jewish. So this is, you could think of lots of examples. There are, I live in Katzrin, which is not majority Goyim, although it was at one point majority Russians, of whom, roughly speaking, 50% of immigrants from the Soviet Union, who Yitzhak Shamir, in his wisdom, brought to Eretz Yisrael, are non-Jewish. In Katzrin, it's actually the proportion is a bit higher, but it would be, even if it was 90%, say, Russian Goyim, according to the Tosefta, it would be preferable for me to live there and not in, say, Lakewood or some, or Kiryas Yol in Chutz La'aretz, where the majority or even everyone is a Jew. Okay, Melamed, this teaches us Sheyeshivath Eretz Yisrael shekula keneged kol mitzvot shebatorah. That living in Eretz Yisrael is equivalent to all the mitzvot in the Torah. So it's not entirely clear how the previous halacha teaches that. You could explain it as saying, Lechora, if you're living in a town where everyone around you is an idol worshipper, you may be less likely to keep mitzvahs, perhaps even grievously so, than in a place even outside Eretz Yisrael where everyone is from. And the fact that nevertheless you should come to live in Eretz Yisrael, says the Tosefta, would teach us that living in Eretz Yisrael is considered keneged kol mitzvot shebatorah. But I don't think that, like, in all seriousness, we think that someone who worships Avodah Zarah and eats treif and eats chametz on Pesach and doesn't fast on Yom Kippur and lives in Kiryat Ono is actually genuinely preferable to someone who's medak, I don't know, the Chasam Sofer. I don't think we really think that, which tells us that we're dealing with a source where we have to understand it at least partially as an exercise in rhetoric, and we'll see as the source continues how that is so. And it continues, one who lives in Eretz Yisrael is as if he's one who's buried in Eretz Yisrael is like being buried underneath the Mizbeach. I don't even know if it's, per se, is it even a good thing to be buried under the Mizbeach? Bechora, you're not allowed to be buried under the Mizbeach because you can't bring a dead body into the Beis Mikdash. But again, on a rhetorical level, we get the gist of what it's trying to say. Lo yetze adam lechutz laaretz ela imken hayuchitim satayim basela. So now we get to a source that, in contradistinction to almost all of this section of Tosefta, looks like it should be interpreted as an actual kind of, let's say, to use the common term, shulchan aruch halacha, like a halacha that you're actually supposed to do, rather than a halacha like you might be supposed to aspire to, or that has some kind of educational value, but is not like halacha lamasa. So what does it say? A man should not leave to go to Chutz La'aretz, except when a sathayim of wheat, a certain measure of wheat, is sold for a seller, which we understand to be a sign that there's famine conditions, basically. Food has become very expensive. And one seller is a lot of money for a sathayim, which is 2 sa'ah, which is a relatively small amount of produce. And if you get to such a situation, then it becomes permitted to leave Eretz Yisrael. Amar Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon says, well, what are we talking about there? Bisman she'eno motze likach, ava bisman she'motze likach, afilu sa'ah basela lo yetze. Rabbi Shimon says, what are we talking about? We're talking about a case where, as a result of wheat being so scarce and having reached these kind of price gouging prices, you can't actually buy it. But if you can actually buy it, it's very expensive, but you can buy it. In fact, it's even more expensive than what the halakha said. The halakha said 2 sa'ah for a seller. But even if it's only 1 sa'ah for a seller, as long as it's still physically available, albeit at these excessive prices, you are, according to Rabbi Shimon, not allowed to leave. And as a general rule, when we get a case where it says b'mer devarim amurim, we generally speaking understand that the Tana comes not to be cholek on the halakha before, but to explain the halakha before. So lechora, unless we have some evidence to the contrary, we say that this is in fact the halakha. The halakha is you use this price as a sign, now I can leave, but that's only when you are having actual physical difficulty accessing grain to buy. But if you can buy grain and it's still there in the shops, no matter how high the price goes, you're not allowed to leave. Rabbi Shimon said, Eli Melech. We're talking about the husband of Ruth, the son of Naomi, from Sefer Megillat Ruth. Megadole Hador, Mepanasei Sibuhaya. He was one of the great people and leaders of his generation. And since he went out to Chutz La'aretz, even though, as you see, as everyone knows from the first psukim of the story, there was a famine, he died, he and his sons, in hunger. But those Jews who didn't leave, even though there was a famine, nevertheless remained alive on their land. That when Naomi and Ruth came back to Bethlehem Yehuda, the whole town was astounded on them. And the fact it says the whole town was astounded on them, if it was the whole town, then there must have been the whole town. It wasn't just a few scattered survivors of the famine. It was a whole town full of people. So they survived. But he and his sons died in the famine. So we see that you can. There are famine conditions, even according to Rabbi Shimon. There are famine conditions when you can leave, but lechora, this is how you should understand the Tosefta. Unless you literally physically can't buy food, it doesn't matter that you see food has reached these incredibly high prices, which is what it seems to be Rabbi Shimon understands having happened here. Unless you physically can't buy food and you leave, this is not allowed, and in fact, you will be punished for it. Whereas those who stay behind and persevere through the adversity will not be punished. Now, as I said, despite the fact that there's obviously an agadic aspect to this section, this part of the Tosefta here, it does look like what we might call a halacha, as in halacha l'maaseh. It has, a threshold, and you can say, wheat has reached this price, I can't find any to buy, therefore I can leave. Wheat hasn't reached this price, or I can find some to buy, therefore I can't leave. So this looks like a halacha. I would say this is halacha l'maaseh. This is actual thing you have to keep. And what it means, the question is, what does it mean to leave? Now, this can anything from a spectrum of leave for good with no intention to return, or leave for like a day just to buy some food with an intention to return. Now, I think you can only possibly read it as something very, very far to the first end of the spectrum in terms of leaving for good or almost for good. Why? Because we have many sources of Tanaim leaving Eretz Yisrael, and there's no indication that there was a famine or anything like that. And it doesn't seem to be that there was anything wrong with it. So one example, but again, it's only one example among many, is a Mishnah in Erevin, in the 4th chapter, I think, where it says that Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azari, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yeshua were returning on a ship from Prandisen, which Lichora seems to be some city in southern Italy. And it says that they were on their way back, and then it was Shabbos, and the question was, can they move around on a ship? That doesn't matter. But the important point for our purposes here is that they went out of Eretz Yisrael, and it doesn't indicate in any way that they went out because there was a famine or anything like that. Now, you can say, well, they went out for another reason that was important, that was equivalent in some way to a famine. It was such an important thing, and it was so important that Rabban Gamliel couldn't go alone. He had to go with 3 other Tanaim. But even if you want to say that, you still have to say that either this halacha in the Tosefta is lav davka, because it's not only in a famine that you can go out, there are other conditions when you go out, or the second, I think more reasonable interpretation, is that the halacha here is talking about permanent relocation, whereas temporary relocation, as they did for some political purpose, it could have been something to do with petitioning some Roman official, although it's not clear why they would go to Prandisen to do this and why they couldn't just petition the Roman governor where they were. It could be something to do with Jewish community in southern Italy, which definitely existed. But we're not told, and Lichora, the reason why we're not told is because actually it's probably not very important, which is to say that this is, there is anyone who wants to claim that there is an issa simply to leave Eretz Yisrael, except under famine conditions for any purpose, has an issue with sources like this, and he has a burden of proof to climb. Now we're going to continue with the rest of this Tosefta and try and get to the end, but we're going to do it a bit quicker, because the rest of it is very definitely in the Agadic rhetorical category. Harihu Omer, this is what it says when Yaakov Avinu has to leave Eretz Yisrael and go to Lavan. V'shavti b'shalom el beis avi, and I will return to my house in shalom to the house of my father. She'en tam olamah, it's not necessary to say it. V'hai Hashem li le'elokim, and Hashem will be for me for a God. Mashma, what? That when I return to Eretz Yisrael, then Hashem will be for me for a God. Are you mashma what? That when you're not living in Eretz Yisrael, Hashem is not for you for a God. What on there, as it says, Lathes lachem es Eretz Canaan lihos lachem le'elokim. The end of near the end of Sefer Vayikra, it says to give to you the land of Canaan, to be for you for a God. Mashma what again? In Eretz Canaan, that is where Hashem is. Where Hashem is for Am Yisrael for a God. As it's, and then the Tosefta says, Kol zaman she'atam be'eretz Canaan, hareinu lachem Eloah. En atem be'eretz Canaan, eni lachem le'Eloah. Now, one of the Kitvayal I looked at briefly this morning, it said Ki'ilu. Now, that might be the correct guess, or it might be just a way. It might actually be a scribal addition to soften these kind of very extreme statements. But it says, at least according to the printed edition, it says, any time that you are in Eretz Canaan, I am for you for a God. You're not in Eretz Canaan, I'm not for you for a God. And it also says, now this part is this part is odd. You have a pasuk in Yehoshua, it says, Ka'abim elef chalutzi sava, and it doesn't quote what seems to be the important part of the pasuk, which is they went out 40,000 men, lifnei Hashem. And then it quotes another pasuk, Ki nathan biyadi eth yoshvei haaretz. Now, this is a pasuk. The only place it says that in the entire Tanakh is a pasuk in Divrei Hayamim, where David is talking about what's happened to him prior to handing over the reins of power to Shlomo Melech. I don't think that have any relevance whatsoever to this this part of Yeshua. Now, it might be misquoting. This might be the printed edition, should we say, of the Tosefta misquoting a different pasuk in Yeshua that talks about V'nathan Hashem biyadenu. Although both Kitvei Yad that I consulted, both of the Kitvei Yad that didn't exist, did clearly have this pasuk written, and even if it's talking about this pasuk in Yeshua, it's still not very clear exactly what the pertinence is. What it says, "V'chi alta al dafkash Yisrael machav shenei haaretz lifnei hamakom melekol zaman shem aleha kula nichbasha, einan aleha kula ena nichbeshes or nichbasha." And would you think that Israel conquered a land before Hamakom, before Hashem? Every time that they're on it, Kula Nechbasha is considered to be conquered. When they're not on it, it's not considered to be conquered. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the logic of this, and since we've got a lot to cover here, I don't want to to take a detour. I will note that while most of the Agadic portion of this section of the Tosefta here is reproduced and expanded upon and interpolated into in the last perek of the end of the last perek of Masechet Ketubos in the Talmud Bavli, as we'll see, this particular part is not, and there might be a reason for that because something seems to be not entirely clear here. Now, the next part is, and it's also famous because it appears in Rashi, if memory serves. On the Chumash, David said, the pasuk literally seems to apply, or it should say the pasuk seems to literally imply that they drove me away when David Melech had to flee the land of Philistine from worshipping God. Is it this case that he just stopped worshipping God? That can't be it. Ela Shai David Doresh. David was explaining, he was expounding. Anyone who leaves Eretz Yisrael b'sha'at shalom, which seems to imply, although we're not supposed to make halachic diukim from Agadata, it seems to, or at least that's the generally accepted principle, that b'sha'at shalom, in times of war, maybe you are allowed to leave. V'yotze ke'ilu oved avodah zarah. Dichtiv, and he quotes a pasuk from Yirmiyahu. So Lichora, I can't possibly be saying David's darshaning a pasuk in Yirmiyahu for very obvious reasons. So it's the Tosefta darshaning a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Untatim ve'eretz azof be'emeth. I will plant them in this land in emeth. Einan aleha enatuin lefanai be'emeth lo b'chol libi v'lo b'chol nafshi. These words b'chol libi v'lo b'chol nafshi they're the continuation of this pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Oh, I should mention, sorry. The source sheet is in the description to this video. So I very strongly recommend, as always, anyone who is following along with the Shia to pause now and to open up the source sheet in Safari so you can follow more easily. Anyway, what it says is that when they're not in Eretz Yisrael, they're not planted before me with all my heart, with all my soul. I.e., it's as if they're not worshipping Hashem. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar on Yisrael shebechutz la'aretz of the avodah zarah pataharahin. So this is an interesting statement. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says a Jew in chutz la'aretz, he's an avodah zarah but tahara. What does that mean? Ketzad, how does this work? Oved kochavim she'asa mishteh. A goy makes a feast, livno, for his son. Wahalach wazimin eskol yehudim shebe'iro, and he invites all the Jews in his town. He's a friendly guy. V'holach v'zimen es kol yehudim shebe'ero. Even though they bring their own food, they bring some sandwiches from Krasinski's in sealed plastic bags. And they don't drink any of his wine. They bring their own Bartanura. Washama shalahem omed al gaban. They've got their own waiter to make sure they get their own food, etc. Of the avodah zara, or it says of the avodas kochavim, of the avodah zara hen shenema v'kara lachal v'choltem mizivcha. He will call to you, and you will eat from his zevach, which is the famous posuk from Parshat Ki Tisa, where it's the prohibition of intermarriage, and the point is, if you intermarry, and he'll call you to his feast, and you eat from his sacrifice, which of course would be a terrible thing. And the point of this is that L'chora, what it's kind of saying is that if you live in Chutz La'aretz, Avodah Zarah is like everywhere, so it's impossible in some sense. You're not going to somehow be involved in Avodah Zarah, even if you're super frum and you keep kosher and you don't drink yain nesach, chas v'shalom, etc., etc. In some sense, you're going to be involved in some way in Avodah Zarah. Now, this source in Tosefta appears in two different places, not part of it in one place and part of it in another place, in the Talmud Bavli. So, and it's divided up almost completely according to the kind of division that I've already suggested here, which is that it's divided up into its kind of halachic section and its non-halachic section. So in Masechet Bava Batra Daf Tzadi Aleph, for those following on the source sheet, it's source 9. It's a sugya that's talking about various issues to do with hoarding, etc., and it basically just takes a detour and quotes. You could say it quotes a Tosefta. It'd be more precise to say it probably quotes a source that's common to it and the Tosefta. It says, Tanu Rabbanan, en yotzim me'eretz l'chutz la'aretz, ele im kein amdu sathayim b'seder. So what we already seen, you're not allowed to go out from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz, except when it doesn't specify wheat, but we understand that it means wheat, when two sa'ah are selling for a seller. Amar Rabbi Shimon, this is all the same stuff we've seen before. Ematha b'zman she'ena motzei likach, ava b'zman she'motzei likach, afilu amda sa'ah b'seller, lo yotzei. So Rabbi Shimon says, when does this apply? When you can't buy it physically, and the price, the market price, is just a simon of how severe the famine has become. But if the price is this price, but nevertheless you can buy it, you're not allowed to go out. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer Elimelech Machlon Machilion Gedolei Adohayu Fanasei Adohayu, etc. And it continues with exactly the same thing about the whole case of Elimelech, but because it's dying in Chutz La'aretz, whereas the people who stay behind didn't die, but because it's the Talmud Bavli, it kind of starts pulling out various things and like asking different questions and getting a bit sidetracked. But that's the basic point. The point is that this halacha of not leaving Eretz Yisrael except when famine hits a certain point is reproduced, not exactly word for word, but certainly in identical logical format in the Talmud Bavli. The Agadic section, as I've already said, is produced in a completely different place, which is the last few dapim on the last Mishnah of Masechet Ketubot, and we will see that in due course. But before we do that, we'll note that this source appears in the Tosefta and it appears in the Bavli. It does not appear in the Yerushalmi. Now, there are two basic ways that you can answer this question of why does this source not appear in the Yerushalmi. One, you can say, well, you look at the Bavli, it's really big. Look at Yerushalmi, it's nowhere near as big. And there's lots of things that Yerushalmi just misses out. And it's certainly the case that there are lots of topics that the Yerushalmi misses out. However, it's not the case that the Yerushalmi just randomly misses stuff out because it's not completed. Because when we say the Yerushalmi is not completed, what we mean is that they started with brachas, and they kind of worked their way through. And there were a few Masechtas like Sanhedrin or Nida that they skipped ahead. But basically, they worked their way through. They got up to Baba Basra, and then they didn't complete it. So if you look at brachas is a big Masechta. Whereas if you look at Bava Metzia is not a big Masechta at all. Now the fact is that Maseches Avodah Zarah exists in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It might be the case that it kind of, according to the order, it shouldn't really exist, so to speak, because they didn't get to it. But it's one of the ones they skipped ahead to do, and it's there, and it's a big Masechta. It's not like it's not a short Masechta at all. So it's somewhat surprising that it is genuinely surprising that the Yerushalmi would not bring this source in Avodah Zarah. If the Yerushalmi holds by this halacha, and then there is another issue. There's another approach to it, which is as follows. Often we find that Davka, there is an affinity between the Tosefta and the Bavli, keneged the Yerushalmi. So a very, very simple, clear-cut example, which you can't possibly dispute, comes of what bracha do you say for hechsheri mitzvot? So you build a sukkah. The Bavli says, say shechianu. The Tosefta says, you say shechianu. Basically the same baraita appears in both sources. Same thing by tzitzit, you put tzitzit on the beged, same thing if you make tefillin. Whereas the Yerushalmi says, no, you have a bracha, shechianu mitzvah wasivanu, la'asoth sukkah, la'asoth tzitzit, la'asoth tefillin. So we have clearly here a clear-cut example of where the halacha in the Tosefta and the Bavli is the same, and the Yerushalmi is the das yachid against the other two. Now you can say, well, this case is different. It's not like that because in those cases, it's not that the Yerushalmi misses out. The Yerushalmi says it, but you don't have license when the Yerushalmi merely doesn't say something to assume that it disagrees with the Bavli and the Yerushalmi. Now it's true, you certainly don't have license to assume. You have license to assume very little. Kol v'chomer when it comes to cases of Torah. But we do have cases which are analogous where it does seem the omission is significant. So, very, very good example, and something that I've thought about a lot over the years, is that we have the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Rosh Hashanah, where we have a machlokas Rabban Gamliel and the Chachamim regarding the Shliach Sibur. Does the Shliach Sibur motzi et Rabbim their chova with tefillah, i.e. Shmona Esrei, or tefillah Sheva if it's a Chag, or tefillah Tesher if it's Rosh Hashanah? Or does he not? Do they have to say their own? Can they not rely on him? Do they have to say their own one? And famously, the way that it works out in the Gemara is we say that in both Gemaras, that on Rosh Hashanah, we hold like Rabban Gamliel that they can be somech on the people somech on the Shliach Sibur, and it's the essential he's motzi them. Whereas all other days of the year, no, people have to be motzi themselves. So there is a baraita that appears where in the Bavli and the Tosefta that forms a very important, it's like very important in the history of Jewish liturgy, especially in Rambamism, shall we say, in the larger sense, where it says, well, okay, according to the Chachamim, who hold it, everyone has to say that themselves. Well, why is there a Chazar Hashatz Bichlal? What is the point of it? And the answer is given that it's to be mostly the people who are not boki, that they can't daven for themselves. So everyone who can davens for themselves, and then for everyone who can't daven themselves, you get the Chazar Hashatz. And okay, well, according to Rabban Gamliel, who holds the other way around, why do people bother davening at all if they can just be Yotzu? If anyone can be Yotzu with the Shliach Sibur, so the Baraita there says is to give so the Shliach Sibur can practice beforehand, and based upon that, I don't know if it's normative halacha, but it's something that goes around, and I've heard from various sources say that if you, for example, personally daven Nisach Sfard, but the shul you're davening davens Nisach Ashkenaz, and you're the Shliach Sibur, and you're going to daven Nisach Ashkenaz, based upon this source, you should even in your private tefillah now, you should daven Nisach Ashkenaz, even if in general you're comfortable with davening a different Nisach from everyone else in the shul. Anyway, be that as it may, This source appears in the Bavli. This source appears in the Tosefta. It does not appear in the Yerushalmi. And again, you might say, well, okay, the Yerushalmi is just a smaller book. But this fits very well with something that we know from Cairo Geniza, which is in the entire history of what we would call Nusach Eretz Yisrael, the phenomenon that actually exists in history rather than modern reconstructions thereof. There is no such thing as a Chazar Tashatz. There is not a single occasion, documented occasion, when anyone who davened Nusach Eretz Yisrael ever davened something, and then Shliach Tzibor got up and said the exact same thing they all just said, except with Kedusha added, as is obviously the case in Nusach Bavel and in all its different versions, Nusach Ashkenaz, Nusach Sefard, Nusach Rambam, Baladi, etc. And in fact, there's no source anywhere in the Talmud Yerushalmi that indicates that there was ever such a thing. And Sefer Chilukim, I don't remember off the top of my head which number it is, basically says explicitly there was no private tefillah in Eretz Yisrael. They all kind of said it out loud together. And then what did the Shliach Tzibor do? He said something that was similar, but he said a poetic version of it. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, especially at Shacharis, it was, and also Chol HaMoed, and also Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, any kind of special occasion. These were like long, extended affairs. On other occasions, they weren't necessarily longer than the kind of non-poetical Nusach. In fact, they might, in some cases, they're even shorter. But there's no reality in the Nusach Eretz Yisrael tradition of what we would call normative Chazar Tashatz, which is to say, to repeat, everyone says the same stuff as each other, and then the Shliach Tzibor gets up and says the exact same thing again. And it can't really be a coincidence that this concept, which is ubiquitous in Nusach Bavel, doesn't exist at all in Nusach Eretz Yisrael, has a baraita that explicitly endorses and mandates it even in the Bavli and Tosefta, but doesn't appear anywhere in the Yerushalmi. So I think it's quite possible that the absence of such a source in Yerushalmi is not stam, it has a reason. But there's further, we'll see further by looking at what the Yerushalmi does say, why there is good grounds for thinking this might be the case. So, Masechet Barachos, Perek Gimel, on the first halacha, there's a series of sections about different reasons why Kohanim might be allowed to become Tami. And one way you can become Tami is just by leaving Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because there's a Gezerah on Eretz Amamim that everything is Tami. Why? L'chora, because there's no way of knowing like where dead bodies are buried, etc. So basically, you just have to assume the whole place is Tami. And so we have a source, Barachos Perek Gimel Halacha Aleph, where it says, and sorry, on the source sheet, this source is, I'll get to it in a second. This source is, I have to scroll up a little bit. It is source 4. Okay, Tani, brighter. Mitame Kohen, a Kohen may become Tami, V'yotzi l'chutz la'aretz, by means of going outside Eretz Yisrael, for the following reasons: L'dinei mamonos, to judge a monetary case; L'dinei nefashos, to judge a capital case; V'lekiddush hachodesh, in order to intercalate, not to intercalate, to set when Rosh Chodesh is; V'le'ibur shana, and to do intercalate the year in order to decide on adding a new month. Lahatzil sadeh min hagoy, to rescue a sadeh min hagoy, which is to say to buy basically a sadeh from a goy. We have a concept comes up a lot in Halacha, and as we'll see in other sources, that when you transfer something from non-Jewish, which is presumed to be idolatrous ownership, to Jewish ownership, this is considered to be a kind of rescue. And even if it's not his own case, he's not going to buy or to participate in a court case in Chutzlaret. He's just going to be someone's lawyer. He's going to go and be a litor seems to be similar word to retor, i.e. someone who does rhetoric. He's going to be someone's advocate in a court. He goes out and he can argue. Le'omod Torah, to learn Torah, Wilisa Isha, and to marry a woman. These are the reasons you can go out. A Kohen, sorry, this is important. All this entire section of the Yerushalmi makes clear over and over and over again, we're talking explicitly about Kohanim can't leave Eretz Yisrael stam because of, Kohanim can't become Tameh. And one of the reasons they become, one of the ways that you can become Tameh and therefore is not permitted to Kohanim is to leave Eretz Yisrael. And this is a list of reasons why a Kohen may leave Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Im Yeshlo Me'echan Lilmod Al Yatama. Rabbi Yehuda says, okay, he can leave Eretz Yisrael to learn Torah, but if there's a place for him to learn in Eretz Yisrael, there's no reason he should learn Torah. Rabbi Yossi Omer Afilu Yeshlo Me'echan Lilmod Torah. Even if he's got a place in yeshiva to learn, Yatama, he can also leave. You can leave Eretz Yisrael. Shalom Ekol Adam Zochel Lilmod. Because presumably, if he's leaving Eretz Yisrael to leave Torah, there's a reason for it. There's some Rav in Chutz La'aretz, and he wants to specifically learn for him for whatever reason, and it's not working out for him. And Rabbi Yossi says, in these situations, we leave the decision up to him. If he thinks that he can go to the yeshiva in Tyre or Pumbedita or Lakewood or whatever, and that's where he'll really be able to learn at a better level and to become more understanding, that we leave that decision to him, because you can't predict in advance where a man will be able to learn well. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says, no, if there's a place in Eretz Yisrael, we should learn in Eretz Yisrael. Amru alav Yosef HaKohen. They say about Rabbi Yosef HaKohen, Shehaya mitame, that he would become tameh. V'yotzi acharabu letzidon, and he would go after his Rav to Sidon. So he was a Kohen. His Rav wasn't a Kohen, and he would follow his Rav because, again, especially in those days, there weren't Gemaras, there weren't Sepharim exactly. Learning required learning specifically from a Rav, and his Rav was very special to him. And the Rabbanim who were present in Eretz Yisrael, he couldn't learn from them in the same way. So he would follow his Rav to Sidon. Aval Amro al Yetzeh Kohen lechutz la'aretz ela im kein hiftichu lo isha. So that doesn't follow directly from what came before. It goes back to the halacha we said that you can leave Torah to marry a woman. And there's a restriction there, which is you can't just go leave Torah just because I'm dating. And I've been dating in Israel for a bit and it's not really working out. I don't like the girls here. I've heard the girls in France are a bit better. I'm going to leave. No. Someone called you up and they sent a letter and they said, look, we've got a girl for you. She's perfect. Here's what it's going to cost, etc. We want the marriage to happen. Then you can go. But stam just to kind of do shidduchim, no, that's not acceptable. Now, we see, just to reiterate the point, that this whole Issa is very, very clearly Kohanim leaving Eretz Yisrael because it's an issue of Tumah. And there is no suggestion that there's any issue for a non-Jew to leave Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, obviously the opposite. They said about Yosef HaKohen that he would follow his Rav to Eretz Yisrael, to Sidon in Lebanon. Okay, but what about his Rav? Well, his Rav did it, so what? His Rav went to Sidon. There's nothing to even talk about because he wasn't a Kohen. It's interesting that Yosef HaKohen would do this, but it's not interesting that his Rav would do this, except in the fact that it gave Yosef, who was a Kohen, license to leave. Now, this source appears in very similar form in the Tosefta and in the Bavli. And what appears in the Tosefta and the Bavli, in this case, doesn't differ in any way. So I'll read Tosefta of Avodah Zarah, Perik Aleph Chet, which is very similar to Mord Katan Aleph Yud Bet. Holchim lirid shel goyim, v'lochim mehen batim. So you can go to a market of the goyim and you can buy from them houses. Sadot kuramim, fields, vineyards, avadim shfachot, slaves. Ineshu hukamat sel yodam. V'chosev u'ma'ale ba'ar chaim. And you can do like documents with them, and you can enter into legal arrangements with them and all this stuff. Even though the whole point of this source is that even though a goy probably there's a bunch of avodah zarah here. There's almost certainly some avodah zarah. It probably is connected to some festival or something. You have to remember just like how when you've got like 300 gods, you can basically have a festival every day for every god. And so there was just not a lot of like neutral secular culture that you could engage in. And so any kind of big commercial event, there's going to be some kind of avodah zarah element to it. But you can go there in order to, again, to be matzil miyadam, to transfer property from their ownership to our ownership. Okay. And then it says, Kohen mitame lahem laha'id v'laduna lehem b'chutz la'aretz. And a Kohen can become tame for them in order to give testimony and to judge about them in chutz la'aretz. Mitame lemod Torah, and he becomes tame to learn Torah. V'lifsa isha, and to marry a woman. So again, the exact same things. So any Jew can go to a Yerid Shel Goyim, which is an Avodah Zarah issue, and any Kohen, the source is very clear, can go to Chutz La'aretz and become Tameh in order to participate in a court case and to argue, or to learn Torah, or to marry a woman. And the Bavli, this appears in Erevin, Mem Zayin Aleph, and Avodah Zarah Yud Gimel Aleph, basically exactly the same words there. Tanya, Holchim lirid shel goyim, v'lochim mehem behema v'avadim v'shvachos batim sados v'karamim v'kosev v'ma'ale ba'archa us shelehem mitnei shehu kamatzim yadam. Again, you can go to this Goyish market in order to buy stuff because it's transferring from Goyish ownership to Jewish ownership. And it continues, Imhai Kohen. And if he's a Kohen, Mitame b'chutz la'aretz. You can also go to chutz la'aretz and become Tameh ledun ula'ar'eh imahem u'mitame l'mot Torah u'lisa isha. And again, the same thing comes after Rabbi Yehuda. It says in all the source is basically exactly identical in all three places, and in all three places it's perfectly clear. It's even more clear in the Yerushalmi because the entire context of the sugya is talking about Kohanim and when they become Tameh and when they're not allowed to become Tameh. But the actual source itself, even in the Bavli and Tosefta, is very clear. We're talking about Kohanim. The issue is if they go to chutz la'aretz, they become Tameh. It's no different in principle from if they were to step into a cemetery, or if they were to go to a hospital where there's a dead body, or a house where there's a dead body, or under a tree near a cemetery, and all these myriad different conditions in which a Kohen might become Tameh. There's no difference between this case of chutz la'aretz and those cases. So what I mean to say is, Kedushat Eretz Yisrael, Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, all this stuff doesn't come in at all because it's a tumah issue, and the rules are they can go out in order to transfer to be matzil, property. They can go out to marry, lechor according to the Yerushalmi. I'll deny that there's something arranged in advance, and they can go to learn Torah according to all things. It's a machlokus Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi. Is this, according to Rabbi Yossi, as a stam license, you can always do it? Or according to Rabbi Yehuda, no, it's only if there's no place to learn in Eretz Yisrael. So that is our first source in Yerushalmi. You turn a few pages on in the Yerushalmi, and it asks a question, which is a different question, which is, can a Kohen become Tameh because of Kibbud Av V'Im? Mahu sheyeh Tameh Kohen lekavod Av V'Im, lekavod Aviv V'Imo. Now, in principle, this would apply to any case, i.e., maybe you have to perform Kibbud Av V'Im, but your father is in a house and there's a dead body upstairs or downstairs or whatever. The reason why this relates to Eretz Yisrael is because we bring a proof from a story that happened, and the story happened to happen with a Kohen who left Eretz Yisrael. But this is not a halacha per se of leaving Eretz Yisrael. This is a halacha of Kohanim becoming Tameh. So Mahu sheyitma Kohen lechavod aviv ve'imo. Rabbi Yissa shama de'asaf imei lebotzra. Rabbi Yissa heard that his mother was coming to Botzra, which is in chutz la'aretz. So he was a Kohen. He made Aliyat Eretz Yisrael, and we'll see a bit more details about that in the parallel source in the Bavli when we get to it. But his mother was coming to visit him, and she was on her way, and he wanted to escort her, which is a very kind of textbook archetypal case of what Kibbud Av V'Im involves. It's like, your mother, who's obviously older than you, she's traveling, and you go in order to help her traveling because you'll need, help. You've also, myriad different things on the way. Asa she'al Rabbi Yochanan, he came to ask Rabbi Yochanan, Mahulat says, can I go outside? If I go now, I'll meet her long before she gets there. It's Yisrael, so can I go? Amalei, so if you're going, not because of kibbud avim per se, but because you're worried even more than that. Not only will she be uncomfortable and it'll be hard for her, and she'll be thirsty and hungry, and she needs like someone to escort her. No, you're worried that bandits will come and rob her and kill her and who knows what. Go. In Mishum kibbud avim. However, if it's just you're not worried about her, she's got escorts, but you just want to make her journey more comfortable and perform kibbud avim. Any of there, not sure. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, Odhi Saricha. Rabbi Shmuel bar Yitzchak says it's still a question, which means to say, so as Rav Book explains it, they disagree with the first version of the story, which is that even the first one, as the Derachim, would also be a question for Rabbi Yochanan. Itrach Rabbi Yochanan aloi wuma. But Rabbi Yissi continued to ask him, like, okay, so you don't know. Well, I don't know, maybe look into it. And he kept asking and kept asking. And he said to him, Im Gamata Litzeth, if you've already decided you're going to go, Tava B'Shalom, you should go in peace. Come in peace. Shama Rabbi Elazar, who was Elazar ben Padat, who's also someone who made Aliyah from Bavli and Eretz Yisrael, was Rabbi Yochanan's kind of Talmud Mufchak. Ein Rishus Gedolim Ezo. So he says, even though Rabbi Yochanan never said Mefurash, yeah, sure, just go. I've been thinking about it. He didn't say I've been thinking about it, and on reflection, it's mutter. He just says if you decided to go, go in peace. And Rabbi Yisra maybe didn't really know whether this was what level of permission he was getting here. And Rabbi Elazar says, look, this Lechora is trying to understand the story. Rabbi Elazar says, look, I'm Rabbi Yochanan's Talmud Mufchak, and I can tell you if he said that, that's you can take that as full permission to go. Now this source appears in the Bavli and Kedushin. Now Kedushin deals with all sorts of different issues. One of the issues Kedushin deals with is kibbud avim, and has a big long sugya about kibbud avim. And it says as follows. So this is Lamed Aleph, Daf Lamed Aleph Bet, and on our source sheet, this would be source 8. Okay. Rabbi Asi. Haythalo em Zakena. Rabbi Asi had an old mother. Amralo, she said to him, Ani rotse tachshita, I want jewelry. Asala, he gave her. Amralo, Ani rotse gever, I want a husband. So she was a widow or something. Amala, achapes lach. I'll look for you. Amralo, Ani rotse gever yafer kamocha. She said to him, I want someone handsome like you. Now, Lechora, he's at least 18 years her junior or something something in that region. So this might be a bit of a tough ask. So he says, Azavosa. He went V'halach Eretz Yisrael. So according to the Bavli, he didn't make Aliyah because he really the Kedusha Eretz Yisrael, or even to learn Torah, or any kind of reason like that. He went to escape his mother because the burdens of kibbud avim were just too much for him. And this relates to an interesting Gemara where Rabbi Yochanan says, basically Rabbi Yochanan was an orphan, and he says, I'm very lucky I was an orphan because kibbud avim is super hard. The burdens involved in it are very big, but it seems to be you can escape some of these burdens just by moving country. Shama shehi holechet achra. He heard that she was going after him. Ba'lifnei Rabbi Yochanan. He came before Rabbi Yochanan. Amalo mahu lesef me'aretz lechutz la'aretz. Can I go out from Eretz Yisrael to chutz la'aretz? Amalo asur. Now, first difference we notice here between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi is in the Yerushalmi, he said, I don't know. Here he says no. Amalo. So the point is, but why? Because he originally didn't ask about his wife, about his mother. He asked about just Stam. Amalo likras imi mahu. What about to meet my wife? Amalo any other day. I don't know. Yitzrach puta chaza uva. He waited and he came back. Amalo asi. But so asi yissa is the same name. You've clearly made up your mind to go. And Hashem should bring you back in peace. He came before Rabbi Elazar. Amalo, Rabbi Elazar said to him, Has v'shalom, Shema raguz ragaz. Oh no, so sorry. Rabbi Yissa or Rabbi Asi says, maybe Rabbi Yochanan's angry at me, and that's what he's saying, look, if you made up your mind to go, just go. What do you want from me? Like, why are you bugging me? Amalo, Rabbi Elazar says, Ma amalach, what did he say to you? Amalo, hamakom yachzircha l'shalom. This is what he said to me. He quotes it. Hashem should bring you back in peace. Amalo, imaya rogez lo ayam. If he was really angry with you, he wouldn't say it like that. He'd say something less friendly. So don't worry. Again, we understand here that Rabbi Elazar really knows Rabbi Yochanan, and kind of Rabbi Yochanan speaks in a certain manner, and Rabbi Yissa wasn't sure how to interpret it. Perhaps because he was relatively new. Perhaps because he wasn't such a close student. Perhaps because he was from Bavel, and we see from various cases that Rabbi Yochanan's students from Bavel, including originally Rabbi Elazar, there was like friction because of they didn't really get each other, so to speak. Like they both spoke Aramaic, but it wasn't like exactly the same dialect. And there were also all kinds of different minhagim that caused friction. But Rabbi Elazar says, look, if he was really angry at you, he wouldn't have said that. But in time, Shama She'aron Haba. Meanwhile, he heard that her coffin came. She died on the way. Amar ilu ha'iti yodeh lo ha'iti yotzei. So Lichora, you have to fill in the gaps here that he did actually go out based upon this source of permission from Rabbi Yochanan. But on the way, he found out that she died on the way, so it was a big waste of time, and he shouldn't have gone, which may Lichora be giving you some kind of message or not. But there are all sorts of differences we could point to between the version in the Bavli and Kedushin and the Yerushalmi and Brachas. But the big one is this. It doesn't say in the Bavli he's a Kohen. Now, it doesn't say in the Bavli he's not a Kohen. And however, as far as I know, someone might be able to correct me from this, you can't prove from the Bavli he's a Kohen. You can prove from the Yerushalmi he's a Kohen. In fact, it's the whole point of the story in the Yerushalmi he's a Kohen. You can't prove he's from the Bavli he's a Kohen. And so therefore, this is one of two sources, we'll see the second shortly, on which certain Rishonim, specifically the Raavad and the Rosh, prove that there is an Issa in general for anyone to leave Eretz Yisrael, even temporarily. Okay, why? Because he's not saying he wants to leave and never come back or anything like that. He's saying, it's clear, I want to leave, I want to do some kibbutz avim. He's obviously coming back. And it was a shaila because of kibbutz avim, but as the Bavli makes explicit, although it's implicit also in the Yerushalmi, if there was no kibbutz avim, for sure he can't go. And it doesn't say in the Bavli that he's a Kohen or anything like that, or this is the issue. And so the Raavad, we don't actually, as far as I know, we don't have what the Raavad actually says. We only have the Raavad as quoted by the Rosh. Parenthetically, most people, when you say the word Raavad, they think of Raavad's Hasagot on the Rambam, or if they're a bit more niche, they think of the Raavad's Hasagot on the Balama or on the Rif. But there's a very good article by Professor Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, that everyone should read. But he explains that this is actually a very inaccurate understanding of who the Raavad was. And the Raavad in his own day was known as Hamafarish, as in he wrote loads of perushim on not just ones that we like. I think we have his perush on Sifra, if memory serves, but on all sorts of Masechtas, on the Gemara and the Mishnah, etc. And most of them are lost. And the reason is because basically Rashi's perushim they're shorter, they're just more comprehensible. They're on a literary level, they're better. On a printing level, they're for sure better. But the point is, an awful lot of what the Raavad said, we only know because someone quotes him. As in, there's huge sections of the Rambam where we don't find any Raavad at all, even though it's almost impossible that he didn't. It's almost impossible in some of the areas where he's silent that he doesn't disagree, because it includes some of the Rambam's most out there shitters. He just commented on certain bits where it was where he felt it necessary to comment, or where his Talmidim felt it necessary to record his comments. And the same with his Hasagot on the Bala Ma'or. But there's a lot of cases where the Raavad wrote something somewhere else, and we don't have the original, or at the very least, the original is sitting in some Ketav Yad and it's unprinted, and we only know through Rishonim. Anyway, the point is the Raavad, based upon this and the source we're going to see in a minute, Desai claimed that there was an Issa to leave Eretz Yisrael. However, we see, and the Gra and others have already pointed out that if we look in it's very clear that from the Yerushalmi that there is no such concept from the Yerushalmi, and the only issa that's actually involved is for a Kohen. Okay, so we move on now to the second source, in which the Raavad and the Rosh used to hypothesize the existence of a general issa to leave, even temporarily, Eretz Yisrael. So turn to source 6 on the source sheet, which is the Yerushalmi Moed Katan. So the Mishnah gives a list of people who are allowed to shave, which means primarily shave your head, by the way, not shave your beard, because you're not allowed to shave your beard anyway. These are those who can shave, can have a haircut on Chol HaMoed. Etc., etc. There's all sorts of people who basically you're supposed to do it before Yom Tov, and therefore if you didn't do it before Yom Tov, Chazal don't allow you to do it on Chol HaMoed itself, because basically it's a kind of, as both Gemaras explain, it's a kind of a kanas, because you didn't do it, in order to make sure you do it next year. And the first case is someone who came min Medina Thayam, i.e. Medina Thayam means the Mediterranean Sea, like Italy, Greece, Crete, something, right? He came back on a ship, and therefore he was on a ship, and you can't shave on a ship because you don't have a razor, you don't have whatever, you don't have the materials you need. It's kind of jolty on a ship as well, it's probably not safe. So the Yerushalmi says, if we scroll down a little, we get to Tani b'shem Rabbi Yehuda. It's taught in name Rabbi Yehuda. Habami Medina Thayam asur lo legaleach. He can't shave. So Rabbi Yehuda is cholek on the Mishnah, or perhaps more precisely, the Mishnah is cholek on Rabbi Yehuda, because of course he came first. And the Yerushalmi saying, Rabbi Yehuda kada'asei. This goes according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbi Yehuda amar asur lefaresh the Yom HaGadol. You're not allowed to go out to the Yom HaGadol. The Gemara continues, Me'ata Kohen sheyotze chutz la'aretz. A Kohen, Me'ata. From this we learn that a Kohen that went to chutz la'aretz, i.e. not Davka on a ship over the Mediterranean, but to Lebanon, to Syria, to Jordan, to whatever, to Egypt, to Bavel. V'yatza shelo b'tzon chachamim. He went out without the permission of the chachamim, without the desire of the chachamim. He shouldn't be allowed to shave. So, what's the whole point about someone who comes back on a ship? He's allowed to shave because he didn't have the opportunity to shave before Chol HaMoed, before Yom Tov. Rabbi Yehuda says, well, he shouldn't have been on a ship in the first place. What's the issa? What's the problem with going on a ship? Lechora, Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's improper to go traveling on ships because it's dangerous. Like, why do you need to? Something like that. In fact, if perhaps I think Rav Buch actually quotes some source to that effect. And then the Gemaras, but it's certainly not some general issa of leaving Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because then the Yerushalmi says what? It says, okay, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because Rabbi Yehuda says you shouldn't go on a ship. But by the same logic, everyone agrees a Kohen shouldn't leave Eretz Yisrael, and therefore what? Therefore, everyone agrees that a Kohen who comes back from Chutz La'aretz or on Chol HaMoed, and he couldn't shave before Chol HaMoed, he can't shave because he shouldn't have been outside Eretz Yisrael in the first place. Just like Rabbi Yehuda says that the guy on the ship shouldn't have been outside Eretz Yisrael, he shouldn't have been on the ship. So we agree, everyone agrees that he shouldn't have been outside Eretz Yisrael. Now, what do we learn from that? We learn, again, the Yerushalmi is very clear. There is an issa to leave Eretz Yisrael. For who? For Kohanim. Why? Because it's Tumah. Is there an issa for anyone else? No. In fact, Davka, it says that there's not an issa for someone else. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the Das Yachid, which is not according to the Mishnah, there's a general issa to go on a ship. But that doesn't apply to someone who just goes by land. And there's all sorts of ways you can go to Chutz La'aretz by land. However, once again, the Bavli says different. So the Bavli, unfortunately, the source sheet is missing the first bit. So I'm going to very quickly open it up in the Bavli, Moed Katan. It's source 7 in the source sheet, and I hope that by the time you open the source sheet, it will be fixed. But in any case, right now I have to open it up here. So it's Yud Daled Amud Aleph, and it says. Okay, Medina Sayyam. Mafnithin de la Rabbi Yehuda. This mission does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, as we learn in the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Habam Medina Sayyam Liyagalech. One who comes back from the Medina Sayyam, he comes back from a trip across the sea. He shouldn't shave. He shouldn't have gone out in the first place. So the fact that he couldn't shave, well, that's his problem. He shouldn't have been there in the first place. So he doesn't have an excuse not to have shaved before Yom Tov, and so therefore he can't shave on Chol HaMoed. And the Gemara continues. Amar Rava lashut, divrei kol asur. Rava says lashut, like stum, to go out, to like spend time in Chutz La'aretz for no particular reason. That everyone agrees you're not allowed to do. Limazonos, he went out for food. He needed to go out because he had to sell or buy something in order to be able to eat. Divrei kol mutar. Everyone agrees that you can do. Now, the question is, what does it mean, asur and mutar? The simplest explanation here is it means when he gets back, is he allowed to shave? So everyone agrees that if he went out, stam, just to like spend time on a ship, then he can't shave when he gets back. If he went out on a ship because he needed to earn money, then he can shave when he gets back. Lo nechlaku ela leher weha. They only disagree regarding like business, like you've got enough money to eat, but you want to make more money so you can have a nice house, a nice living, you want to buy a car, whatever. And so it's saying the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rava, according to the Kimsa Rava mates, it's not about the machlokas only falls on the middle case. Everyone agrees, even Rabbi Yehuda's opposition to going out on a ship, says Rava, it's not so extreme that if you needed to do it because you needed to eat, that he accepts was a legitimate reason, and therefore when you come home you can shave. And on the other hand, the Chachamim's approval of going out on a ship isn't so extreme that if you just did it like because you fancied sailing, because you're a yacht person, therefore that was a sufficient excuse for not shaving before Yom Tov, and now you're allowed to shave on Chol HaMoed. The question is, you went out on a business trip, and the question is a business trip a good enough reason to go out on a ship, in the run up to Yom Tov or not? And then the Bavli kind of goes on, and it queries this because Rav says, is it Rav or is it Rabbi? Yes, because Rabbi says that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda on this and not like Rabbi Yehuda on this, and then it says, well, if Rava's akimta is true, then why should he have said this? It's not really. It's kind of, for want of a better word, a very stereotypically Bavli-ish sugya that ends up saying something quite simple and obvious, but after multiple twists and turns. So we're not going to spend too much time learning that. Now, what is the important point here, though, is once again, the Bavli has reproduced the source in the Yerushalmi, and it has admitted what might be considered the critical piece of information. The critical piece of information is that a Kohen who went to Chutz La'aretz, according to that, everyone agrees can't shave when he comes back. Why? Because a Kohen can't leave Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because a Kohen can't become Tamei. And there's no fundamental difference between a Kohen entering a building with a dead body and a Kohen going to Chutz La'aretz. They're both exactly the same from the point of view of this halacha. Because the issue is not anything to do with Yeshiva Eretz Yisrael or Tumah or Kedusha Eretz Yisrael or anything like that. The issue is Tumah. And the Bavli omits that, and it only puts in Rabbi Yehuda's opposition. And again, based on combining this source with the previous source that we saw of the story of Rabbi Yissa, which, as it's presented in the Bavli, Raavad and Rosh and those who follow them, claim that all this is based upon the idea that not for a Kohen, because a Kohen isn't mentioned here, but for anyone there's an Issa. Why does Rabbi Yehuda oppose going to Medina Sayyam? Because there's a general Issa of traveling outside Eretz Yisrael for anyone. But again, if we follow the source into the original, This is clearly not so. Like, it's mafurish not so. And not just that, the fact is, again, the Bavli gives you space to make this surmise, but the Bavli never once tells you that there's an issa to leave Eretz Yisrael in any of these sources. Certainly not temporarily, as we'll see. Permanently is a different issue. In none of these sources does the Bavli tell you there is an issa for Stam, a Jew, to leave Eretz Yisrael, to go on holiday, to whatever. It just presents sources that in the Yerushalmi are talking about Kohanim, omits the pertinent piece of information it's talking about Kohanim, and therefore gives you room to surmise that anyone's not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, even temporarily. The question really is the Bavli giving you that room deliberately? Does the Bavli want you to come to this conclusion? In which case, why not just say it? Or does the Bavli just, the way it's presented the sources, made it possible in a way that it wouldn't have been possible had they had the Yerushalmi in front of them? Although, by the way, the Rosh did have the Yerushalmi in front of him and quotes it, but Lichora, he had a very corrupt or messed up version of the Yerushalmi or something, because if he had it doesn't seem possible that had he had the accurate version of the Yerushalmi in front of him, he could have understood it this way. It makes it possible, but this was never, in fact, the Bavli's intention. And Lichora, I think that seems more likely to me, not least because the first source we saw from the Yerushalmi, the first part of Brachot, about the general halacha of when may a Kohen leave Eretz Yisrael, is reproduced in the Bavli and also in the Tosefta, explicitly talking, as it does in Yerushalmi, about Kohanim. Now, the last source we're looking at is at the end of Masechet Ketubot. As I already said, the Tosefta in Avodah Zarah that we looked at the beginning, which has kind of two sections, a strict halachic section about when can you leave Eretz Yisrael depending on certain famine conditions, which Lichora is talking about permanently, which is embedded in a larger section of Agadic things about how terrible it is to leave Eretz Yisrael, and not leaving it, and not living in Eretz Yisrael is like not having a god, and it's like being over the Zara, etc., etc. So that appears on the last Mishnah. The last Mishnah in Masechet Ketubot. Now, this is the very last source on the source sheet, and it's very, very long, and we're not going to read all of it here. We're going to read bits. Now, the first thing is the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us quite a well-known halacha, which is that if there's a husband and wife, and one wants to move to Eretz Yisrael and one doesn't, or they live in Eretz Yisrael and one wants to move out and one doesn't, the halacha doesn't go, there's no gender distinction in this halacha. The halacha just favors whoever wants to live in Eretz Yisrael or stay in Eretz Yisrael. So if a husband and wife, if the husband wants to go to Eretz Yisrael and the wife doesn't want to, he can divorce her, and she's voided her ketubah, no money for her. On the other hand, if the wife wants to go and he doesn't want to go, she can say, I want you have to give me my ketubah now because I want to go to Eretz Yisrael. And the same in reverse for if they're already living in Eretz Yisrael. Now, some people say, well, you see from this clearly that there's why would Chazal say this, that there's not a mitzvah, there's not an issa to leave Eretz Yisrael? Now, logic actually says the opposite, which is follows. If there's actually an issa to leave Eretz Yisrael, or a mitzvah to come to Eretz Yisrael, why say anything about the divorce contract? Let's say they're both living in Eretz Yisrael, and the husband wants to leave and the wife doesn't want to leave. Now, the halakha is he has to give her ketubah, because she's right. But if it's asked to leave Eretz Yisrael, just say, what are you talking about? You're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Just ban him. Like, he's not. If he's not allowed to leave, you don't have to tell him give her a ketubah because the fact that Chazal made these rules about who gives who the ketubah under what circumstances tells you very clearly that they want people to live in Eretz Yisrael. That's for sure. There's no doubt about that. But it also tells you that there is no actual rule against leaving, and actually no rule demanding people turn up either. Because if there was, this would all be completely unnecessary. Because you wouldn't have to say to him, look, if you leave, you pay this financial penalty that your wife who doesn't want to leave you have to give her a ketubah. Or in reverse to the woman who wants to leave, you say to her, look, you can leave, but if you do, you're not getting any money because he can just divorce you without the ketubah. Because, again, to repeat myself, if she just wasn't allowed to leave or he wasn't allowed to leave, there'd be no reason to say this in the first place. Just say, you're not allowed to leave. There you go, full stop, done. Nakuda. So we see and the second reason this is clear, because exactly the same thing applies to Yerushalmi. If I'm living in Yerushalayim and I want to go live in Katzrin and my wife says, no, I want to stay in Yerushalayim, she can say, and she can basically force me to divorce her and give her ketubah. Or vice versa. If she wants to go live in Katzrin, and I don't want to go live in Katzrin, I want to stay in Yerushalmi or Kodesh, I can say, well, look, I'm going to divorce you now, and you can go out and you can be homeless. Okay. Now, no one says there's an issa to leave Yerushalayim or a mitzvah to live in Yerushalayim. Like, I don't think. So if it's literally exactly the same logic applies. It's clear that Chazal want to encourage people to live in Yerushalayim, although by the time the mission was written, this is a completely theoretical halacha because they weren't allowed to live in Yerushalayim, and they all lived in the Galil, or at the most south they lived somewhere like Lud. But it's clear that Chazal, at least in theory, want to encourage people to live in Yerushalayim, and they want to encourage people to live in Eretz Yisrael. But just as there's no mitzvah, there's no issa to leave Yerushalayim, there's also no issa to leave Eretz Yisrael. Now, we're going to look at two sections of but. What this sugya does do is it produces a long discussion, basically, of the mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael and how important it is and when it applies and when it doesn't apply, etc. And it's not a super coherent. It's not a super coherent Gemara. But there's lots of interesting material in it. Now, the most interesting material, arguably, involved is the famous three oaths, which is, of course, the basis of what we might call religious anti-Zionism, especially since the Satmar Rebbe, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, chose to make it the kind of centerpiece of his ideology. But there's also lots. We're not actually going to look at that because it's a whole sugi b'fnei atzma. Well, it's not literally a sugi b'fnei atzmo, but it's so to speak, it's a topic b'fnei atzmo. But we're going to look at two different interesting parts. Now, one thing before we look at it, we're going to look at our last source in the Yerushalmi, which is again from Moed Katan. So I said part of that Yerushalmi and Moed Katan is reproduced in the Bavli, minus the section about Kohanim, with the possible implication you could draw from that anyone is allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. Although it has to be said, even from that Bavli specifically, the implication is very weak. There's not really anything that actually kind of says that, unless you really wanted to say it. The first story we saw that was producing Kedushin, that really does look like, if you don't know the background in Yerushalmi, that really does look like there is some kind of generally applicable issa to leave Eretz Yisrael. And if you don't know that Rabbi Yissa is a Kohen, then you have no way of then you would just assume that was the case. Now, this Yerushalmi, after it's brought up the fact that everyone agrees that a Kohen who left Eretz Yisrael and comes back on Chol Hamoed can't shave because he shouldn't have been gone out in the first place, it continues. Had Kohen asa legabe Rabbi Chanina. One Kohen came to visit to Rabbi Chanina. Amale mahu letzor lasos davar mitzvah lachlos or liyabem. Can I? Likori talking about himself. Can I go to Tzor once again this is Tyre as it's known in English in Lebanon in order to do a mitzvah? What's a mitzvah? To do either chalitza or yibum. So Lichora, my brother, was there and he died without heir. And can I go do yibum or chalitza with the wife? Amale. And of course, if he doesn't, she's a guna now. So it's a mitzvah, it's also compassionate. Amale, achiv shel oso ish yatzar. His brother went out, Lichora, also a Kohen. I mean, not Lichora, he for sure was a Kohen because he was his brother, right? Baruch hamakom shenagafel. And Baruch Hashem that he died. He deserved to die for having gone out of Eretz Yisrael. Wa'at mevakesh la'asos ki yotzebo. And you want to do similar to him? If the Ba'imim under those who tell the story slightly differently, Hechin Amale, this is how he said it. Achiv shelo oso ish hiniach imo v'chibek nochria. The brother of that man abandoned the bosom of his mother, i.e., where he was born, Lechora, and he hugged the bosom of a Goya. Now, Baruch Shenagafo, and blessed is the one who killed him. So both versions of the story are pretty condemnatory. But again, they are both very clearly talking about a Kohen. But that's let's read on. Shimon Baba after the Gabi Rabbi Chanina. Now, same story also about Rabbi Chanina. Shimon Baba, who is also a Kohen, you should know. It doesn't say it explicitly here in the Yerushalmi, but it does say explicitly in other places he's a Kohen. He came before Rabbi Chanina. Amale, kasuvli hada igra, write me a letter of recommendation or something that I can go out to Chutz La'aretz. Lechora, also it means like Lebanon or something. So remember, the Jews were concentrated in the Galil and also kind of the North Galil and what we now call the Golan Heights, and the Jewish settlement kind of extended to a certain extent all the way into Lebanon, and so that's kind of where a lot of people wanted to move. Like they were quite close to the border of Eretz Yisrael, as Chazal defined it, but they wanted to go a bit further because there was better jobs there or whatever. So he came to me and said, "Can I write me a letter of recommendation so I'll be able to go out there?" I'm on death's door. You omrim li, and they'll say to me, "Natia achas shelachemda shehayasa lanu be'eretz Yisrael hirtata leses lechutz la'aretz." And they will say about me, there was one cherished sapling in Eretz Yisrael, and I let him go out. So I'm not going to let you go out. Now, he seems to be exaggerating it a bit because Rabbi Hanina was an early Amora, and in the up-and-coming generation was Rabbi Yochanan, among others. So it doesn't seem that so much really hinged on Rabbi Shimon Bar Ba, who, he's a highly good Amora, obviously, but he's not one of the main figures who appears on every page of the Yerushalmi or anything like that. He wasn't like an Amud of the Torah Sheba'al Peh. But he obviously thought he was a very promising pupil, and he didn't want to permit him to leave Eretz Yisrael. Now, we should note that, as phrased in Yerushalmi, his reason for not letting him leave is because he doesn't want to let this very promising student leave and kind of abandon the Torah community of Eretz Yisrael and lead to a diminution of Torah study in Israel. L'chor, the mere fact that he's a Kohen, it's good. He just says, "I'm going out for Parnasa." We know, as we said before, that you can go out for to do court cases, to buy fields, etc. And l'chor, for that he'd let him, but because he's such a great Torah scholar, he doesn't want him to leave. Now, however, look at the previous story; was very extreme. It's Cohen wanted to go out. He wanted to do Yibum, which is a Shora mitzvah. Now, it's not on the list of mitzvahs that the kind of fundamental brighter in the Yerushalmi said that you can go out for. Although maybe it is because it said Lisa Isha, you can go out to marry a wife, and Yibum is certainly a form of marriage. But he's absolutely adamant that he shouldn't do it, and he seems to imply that he doesn't imply. He says that the first Cohen who went out did a very bad thing and terrible thing, and that's why he died. Now, if the issue is he was a Cohen, he shouldn't have gone out because of Tumah. Well, we've already said a Cohen can go out because of Tumah, according to Yerushalmi, in order to marry a wife. And he married someone, so maybe that was the reason he did go out in the first place. So why is Rabbi Hanina so upset? As with a lot of cases, there is missing information here. And you can fill in that missing information in different ways. And based on how you fill in that missing information, you will come to different conclusions. On the other hand, as that obviously implies, what it means is that the assumptions you put into that text are going to dictate what you get out of it. So you're really just going to arrive at the conclusion you wanted to arrive at in the beginning. But what I can say for sure is important is that the Bavli cites this story over here in Masechet Ketubot on Parshat Kufyot Aleph, quite a long way down into the source, as it's quoted on the source sheet. Hahu Gavra, that man. So in Yerushalmi it said explicitly. It says explicitly. It doesn't say who that man is, but it does say he was a Cohen. Here it just says that man, the Nafale Yabama, that fell to him a Yibum, Bei Hosea in the house of Hosea, which is some place in Chutz La'aretz. Asala Kamei de Rabbi Hanina. He came before Rabbi Hanina. Amalei Mahu lemechas uliyabmeh. Maybe am I allowed to go out of Eretz Yisrael in order to perform Yibum? Amalei Achiv Nasa Kuthith. His wife married a Kutit. Now, apparently, Kutit is censorship, and Kitvei Yad the Gemara say Goya, but I haven't looked it up. But that parallels what it said Nachriya in the Yerushalmi. Umeth, and he died. Baruch HaMakom Shehago. Who Yared Acharav, and he should go. Who Yared Acharav, and he should go down after him. Okay, so in both sources, it talks about his brother as if he'd married a goy. Now, I don't think he literally married a goy. I mean, you don't do yibum or chalutza with a goy, that's for sure. But Rabbi Hanina seems to condemn, like marrying a woman from outside Eretz Yisrael is as if you've married a goy. So it's a very bad thing to do. So again, it's not very clear if Rabbi Hanina disagrees with the basic halacha and he's more strict or whatever. But what is clear is that in the Bavli, it doesn't say he's a Kohen, and therefore it looks. Whereas in the Yerushalmi, you're given to understand, especially if you know the other sources, which we've looked at, which is that there's a specific issa for a Kohen to leave Eretz Yisrael. You understand that the fundamental issue here is an issue of Kohanim leaving because there's a technical issa for Kohen to leave because of Tumah. Whereas here it just says he's just a man, and therefore it looks very much like what? That at least according to Rabbi Hanina, leaving Eretz Yisrael, just stam for a man, is a very, very serious issa. So we see yet another case where the Bavli takes a source from the Yerushalmi, and because of information it omits, looks very much like there is an actual issa on any person to leave Eretz Yisrael, even to do a mitzvah, even temporarily, should we say, and mitzvahs can override that. In this case, mitzvahs can't override that because he shouldn't do yibum because his brother shouldn't have gone out in the first place, and so there shouldn't have been this yibum, or something like that, according to Rabbi Chanina. So we've seen three sources: the source of kibbud avim, which appears in the Bavli without any mention of the Kohen is the issue. This source about yibum, which again appears without any mention of Kohen is the issue, and the source in Moed Katan that omits the crucial information from the Yerushalmi that it's specifically Kohanim are not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, and leads Riva to make this supposition that the whole problem of being Mafashe Yam is fundamentally an issa of there's an issa of anyone to go outside Eretz Yisrael. Now we're going to read on a little bit in the Bavli from where we got up to about this story of Rabbi Chanina. Amar Rav Yehuda Shmuel Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel Kashem she'asur l'seif from Eretz Yisrael leBavel, just as it's asur to go out from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, kach asur l'seif meBavel l'sha'ar Atzof. So also it's asur to go out from Bavel to other lands. Rava, Rav Yosef, the Amri Tavehu, Rava, Rav Yosef, both of them say, Afilu mepimpaditha leve kubi. So Rava, these two Amoraim add that not only you're not allowed to leave Bavel to go to France or whatever, you're also not even within Bavel, you're not allowed to leave Pumbedita, which is where one of the two big yeshivas is, obviously, to go to Beikubi, which is just some town which is not doesn't have a yeshiva and it's full of Amharites and whatever. So we're now seeing two interesting things. We've seen that the Bavli, not consistently, because it does appear in the Bavli, in Avodah Zarah and Erevin, that there is a specific issa of Kohanim leaving Eretz Yisrael because of Tumah. But the Bavli, not consistently, but repeatedly, takes sources that in the Yerushalmi have only one meaning, which is that Kohanim can't leave Eretz Yisrael, and present them without the crucial information and makes it look like anyone can't leave Eretz Yisrael. And it does seem to be that the Bavli, since there's some kind of issa, but the Bavli adds an extra layer, which is the Bavli adds a new issa, which is you're also not allowed to leave Bavel to go to somewhere else. So you're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael to go to Bavel, but if you're in Bavel, you're not allowed to leave Bavel to go to some other place. And even within Bavel, you're not allowed to go from Pumbedita to some less learned place. Now, what is this issa according to the Bavli? It's very, very clear what the issa here is in the Bavli. The issa is that you're not allowed to go from a Torah center to somewhere where it's not a Torah center. And the reason for that is very obvious. The reason for that is because in a Torah center, you'll learn Torah, you'll grow spiritually, you'll keep mitzvahs because you're surrounded by people keeping mitzvahs, you'll have positive peer pressure. You go to somewhere else, you won't have positive peer pressure, you'll learn less Torah, you will keep less mitzvahs, you might go completely OTD. Now, in general, there is no doubt that the Chachamim of Eretz Yisrael valued very much living in Eretz Yisrael. They didn't want people to leave, they wanted to encourage people to stay. So we've seen that mission in Ketubot about how they use the halachas of when you do and don't have to give a ketubah in order to do that. There's also a very famous source that's quoted about how you can ask a goy to to write a contract on Shabbos in order to buy property from the Eretz Yisrael. They were very keen to encourage yeshiva at Eretz Yisrael, but they don't make clear why. Now, there are at least three reasons why, for Chazal, it was important to encourage people who live in Eretz Yisrael. Number one is they lived in Eretz Yisrael, and they'd always lived in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbinic Judaism was, at its inception, as in from when we can see it in history, a completely purely Eretz Yisrael movement. We know that there were Jews all around the Mediterranean. We also know that they did all sorts of weird non-rabbinic stuff to various degrees. I mean, almost all of them prayed in Greek, for example, but they got a lot weirder than that. I mean, strictly speaking, praying in Greek is mutter according to Mishnah and Sota, though no rabbinic community has ever done that. But they clearly were only to a very limited extent under rabbinic authority. The Chazal clearly was an Eretz Yisrael thing, and they, to a large extent, only really rated the Jews of Eretz Yisrael. Over time, kind of begrudgingly to a large extent, they came also to respect the Jews of Bavli, or at least the Rosh Yeshiva of Bavli. So one thing of living in Israel is this is where we've always lived. This is our homeland. We don't want Jews to abandon it, even though it's very hard and we're under Roman oppression and the economic circumstances are what they are. We want people to live here because this is where we live. Another reason is because this is a land HaKadosh Baruch Hu promised Avraham Avinu. This is the land of our forefathers. This is where David Melech was. All the kind of reasons you'll be given if you learn religious Zionism, and that clearly is a component of it. And another part of it was this is where the Torah is. It's not just it's where we are, and we want to preserve our Jewish community here. It's just Torah really, certainly early, but even to a large extent in the period that Amoraim, Torah only really exists here. It kind of exists a bit in Bavli. It for sure doesn't exist in Lebanon or Syria or whatever. And you shouldn't be living in these places because even if there are Jews there, they're not from, they're not decent, they don't know anything. Like they probably don't care. But even if they do care, how are they supposed to keep the Torah when they're all ignoramuses? So you have these three reasons why it's very, very important to tell Jews, come to Eretz Yisrael, don't leave Eretz Yisrael. And when these three reasons just are all a part of a parcel, you don't necessarily disentangle them. But what happens when you get to a later period, when one of these reasons might be very true, but one of the reasons might not be true? So by a later period in Amoraim, when there's as much Torah activity going on, at least in Pumbedita and Surah, as there is in anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, well, does this really apply anymore? And then do some of these halachas get swapped over to Bavel? And the Bavli is saying, yes, the Bavli is saying in as many words, yes, just as people shouldn't leave Eretz Yisrael because it's a Torah center, so also people shouldn't leave Bavel because it's a Torah center. And even within Bavel, people shouldn't leave Pumbedita because it's a Torah center. And that, of course, has lots of implications. Let's say you're living in Volozhin in 1911, and someone says, let's go to Eretz Yisrael. Well, you could very legitimately say, well, Volozhin is a Torah center, Eretz Yisrael is not a Torah center. And according to the logic, here you have, it's not necessarily so obviously what you're supposed to do now is to go to Eretz Yisrael. Yes, it's also very true that Eretz Yisrael is the land of our forefathers, promised Avraham Avinu, it's where the Mashiach is going to be, it's where the Beis Hamikdash is going to be, etc. That's definitely true. There's no doubt that's true. But it's also true that at certain points of history, it was not a Torah center. So therefore, it's not so clear where it is you're supposed to live and not live. And let's now go back to an earlier point in our sources here, and we'll wrap it up. Tanu Rabbanan, Le'olam yadu Adam be'Eretz Yisrael, afilu be'ir sheruba of the Kochavim. I'm just reading the printed Bavli. V'al yadu b'chutz haaretz afilu be'ir sheruba Yisrael, shekol ha'da be'Eretz Yisrael, dome k'mi sheyesh lo Eloah, v'chol she'ein ha'da be'aretz ein lo Eloah. So this is the Bavli in the Masechet Ketubot, basically bringing the non-halachic part of that long baraita we started this year with in Tosefta Vodazara, and bring it here. As we saw, the strict halachic bit was brought separately in Bava Metzia, and that part is not brought here, but all the rest of it is brought here. So it says, just as we saw before, a man should live in Eretz Yisrael, even if it's a city that's mostly goyim, because anyone who lives in Eretz Yisrael, it's as if he has a god, and anyone who lives in Chutz Haaretz, it's as if he doesn't have a god. And then it quotes a thing about David and Geshunim Hayomis Be'ach Benachlas Hashem, etc. That if you leave Eretz Yisrael, it's as if you don't have a god. But then it quotes Rabbi Zera Hawa Mashtamit Mine de Rav Yehuda, the Ba'a Lemesak Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Zeira, who famously came to Eretz Yisrael and was a very, very important figure in the development of both Talmudim, because he brought a lot of Bavli traditions to Eretz Yisrael, and he is quoted very frequently in the Yerushalmi as a conduit of these kind of Bavli traditions. So he went to Eretz Yisrael, we know. Now, before he went to Eretz Yisrael, he was hiding from Rav Yehuda, an Amor in Bavel. The Amar Rav Yehuda, why was he hiding from him? Anyone who leaves Bavel and comes to Eretz Yisrael violates an aseh. He violates a mitzvah from the Torah. Well, it's not from the Torah because it's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. Bavela yuva'u, they will be brought to Bavel. V'shama yihiyu ad yom pok diotham, until the day I remember them. Nu'um Hashem. Now, this is all the introduction to the whole three oaths thing, etc., and we're not going to go into it. But here adds an even more level. The Bavli brings this source from Masechet Avodah Zarah, which isn't anywhere in the Yerushalmi, all about the very, very great importance of living in Eretz Yisrael, and anyone who doesn't live in Eretz Yisrael is as if he's over the Avodah Zarah. And the other bits we saw, they also brought the Hemshech, the bit about how if you're buried in Eretz Yisrael, it's as if you're buried under the Mizbeach, etc. All of that material, except the weird Yehoshua Midrash, as I mentioned, it doesn't appear there, is brought, but it interrupts it with countervailing things. One, as we've already seen, is that you're also not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael. True, you're also not allowed to leave Bavel, and in Bavel you're not allowed to leave Pumbedita. But here's another thing. This is not the majority opinion, but it is the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Not only are you not allowed to leave Bavel to go to France, you're also not allowed to leave Bavel even to go to Eretz Yisrael, because the Jews of Bavel are supposed to stay there until the time of the Mashiach. Now, again, we see that this is for sure not accepted as like normative halacha. What is maybe accepted as normative halacha is what precedes in the three oaths section, where it says that even though you're allowed, you can go live in Israel, you can't go up Kahoma, which, as I said, we're not going to get into. But there is a kind of a voice, shall we say, in the Bavli, which, while producing this material, extolling the great virtues of living in Eretz Yisrael, as appears in the Tosefta, also countervails it with material about the great virtues of living in Bavel. And just before I end, I'll say one more thing, which is that, as I said at the beginning, the difference between the Yerushalmi and the Bavli might be something that surprises people. People might have assumed that when they were starting out, that the Yerushalmi is going to really say, no, Eretz Yisrael all the way. You don't live, if you're not living in Eretz Yisrael, you're trash. If you move right away, if you're living in Eretz Yisrael, no way you can leave, no reason, no way, no say, no how. Whereas the Bavli would be more pro living not in Eretz Yisrael, because that's what they do. Now, part of that is true in that the Bavli introduces sources not about how it's good to live in Chutz La'aretz, but specifically about how it's good to live in Bavel. The rest of Chutz La'aretz is also not good, but Bavel specifically is good. But it's actually Davka, the Bavli, much more than the Yerushalmi, that emphasizes consistent, that seems to emphasize more, that first of all brings this source from the Tosefta that doesn't appear anywhere in the Yerushalmi, about the really, really great, super important living in Eretz Yisrael, and B, repeatedly modifies the source in the Yerushalmi in a way that removes this prohibition of Kohanim leaving, and therefore makes it look like there's a general prohibition. So if you kind of sum up the Bavli, you might end up by saying something like as follows: you really, really shouldn't leave Eretz Yisrael, but if you're in Bavel, you probably shouldn't really leave Bavel either. We definitely shouldn't leave Bavel to go to Eretz Yisrael, to go to some other country. Should you leave Bavel to go to Eretz Yisrael? Maybe, okay, you could, but you don't. Maybe you shouldn't. Probably don't have to. So what the Bavli kind of ends up by doing is saying living in Eretz Yisrael is really super important, but also living in Bavel is also good. Whereas the Yerushalmi Davka actually underplays relative to the Bavli the great importance of living in Eretz Yisrael by omitting various sources, and also very strongly emphasizes a specific issa that applies not to Jews in general, but specifically to Kohanim, that they're not allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael because of Tumah. And there are all sorts of conditions that might override this: to marry a woman, to learn Torah, to participate in a court case, and maybe kibbud avim, maybe this, maybe that, yibum lichora not, etc. But this is something that applies to Kohanim, and it does not apply in any respect to Jews, and there doesn't seem to be even one hint of one word of one sentence that even looks like that there's a prohibition to temporarily leave Eretz Yisrael in the Yerushalmi. Now, I saw in the name of, I saw in a shir by Rav Lichtenstein, Zichron Levracha, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, who, just to be clear, he doesn't say anything anywhere near as extreme as what I'm saying, but he compares living in Eretz Yisrael to living in a sukkah. And if you go to shul on sukkah, someone says, wait a second, Shivat Yamim b'Sukkot Teshvul, well, what are you doing? How can you leave a sukkah? That's disgusting. Because part of living in a sukkah is also going outside your sukkah. It's just like you live in a house and you leave your house and you come back to your house. Also, you live in a sukkah and you leave out. So he says that similarly, you live in Eretz Yisrael, and he doesn't say that this is definitely how you have to look at it, but I'm saying this is how the Yerushalmi does understand it. You live in Eretz Yisrael, and part of living in Eretz Yisrael is sometimes you leave and then you come back, because that's what it is to have a home. But you can also travel. Now, most people, peasants, don't travel very much. But if you're a Choshev Rav and you've got an important person, there are all sorts of reasons why you might travel. If you're a Kohen, you've got a technical issue. But apart from that, and that's why in the Mishnah we saw in Erevin, Rama Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, they left. There's nothing wrong with it. It's part of their business of being leaders of the people. And there's not even a shaila about, is it okay? Now, one thing I say about is that maybe makes this make more sense is that it's one thing to tell people you can't leave Eretz Yisrael if you're not in Eretz Yisrael, because what you're really telling people is, if you ever go to Eretz Yisrael, you're never allowed to leave again, unless you have extenuating circumstances. Which, in a way, is kind of telling people, think twice before you go, because once you go, you're stuck. Whereas if you're in Eretz Yisrael, to tell people you're never allowed to leave is a much more extreme phenomenon. And maybe that's actually explains the difference. But I will finally end by saying one thing, which is that even though it does appear in the Rambam in Hilchos Tumah about this special Isra of Kohanim, this Isra of Kohanim leaving Eretz Yisrael is something that's like very not really known. People don't appreciate it because it's become jumbled up in people's mind with this Isra that was hypothesized by the Raavad and the Rosh and other Rishonim of a general Isra of leaving Eretz Yisrael. And in fact, if you look in the source in the Rambam, in the source sheet, right down at the bottom, you'll see that the Rambam says any Jew can leave Eretz Yisrael to learn Torah, to marry a woman, or to do court case, etc. Where does it say that? Where does he find that source? Well, it says so in the Bavli in two places, as we've seen, in the Avodah Zarah and Erevin. It says so in the Yerushalmi, as we've seen. It says so in the Tosefta, in Moed Katan, and Avodah Zarah. But in every single place it says Mafurash, we're talking about Kohanim. And therefore, when the Rambam applies that halacha in Hilchos Malachim, and he says it applies to any Jew, that is, I'm afraid to say, Dichod Rambam Zal, a confusion of two separate concepts. There is simply this concept of you're not allowed to leave unless you've got a wife to marry, and do they promise, etc. All these conditions, it just simply has no application to an ordinary Jew. It only has application to a Kohen. And what's happened in the story of halacha is because this halacha is so extreme of you're never allowed to leave Eretz Yisrael, and because poskim are aware of the shaky foundations of it, shall we say, they have a tendency to be very makel. And if you look at mainstream poskim and what they say, essentially, unless you're going on a gambling holiday to Las Vegas and it's completely unjustifiable what you're doing, basically you're going to get a heter from someone to leave Eretz Yisrael. You say, okay, I need to do it because it's for my mental health. I need to do it because it's a cultural event. I need to do it because maybe there's some business angle. You want to leave Eretz Yisrael unless you're a proper shaygut and you have and what you're going to do, you're going outside to do just degenerate things. You're going to get a heter from someone unless you have a strong hardali rav who's going to tell you no, even if you do have a good reason to go, right? But the truth is that we should completely separate the concept of a Kohen and a non-Kohen. And with a Kohen, I venture to say it's improper to rely on all these heterim that I need to go on holiday with my family because I have a very stressful job or whatever. We should, with Kohanim, the rules as they appear in the Baraita that's brought in the Yerushalmi and the Bavli in two places and the Tosefta in two places should apply as stated, basically, i.e. they're allowed to leave to get married. They're allowed to leave to learn Torah. They're allowed to leave to buy a field or whatever. And that's it. Whereas with a Jew, the simple truth is that there's actually no real source, not in the Bavli, not in anywhere, even though the Bavli might kind of be possibly be holding your hand to make that conclusion, but it doesn't say it in the Bavli, it doesn't say it anywhere that there's any Issa for Jews to leave Eretz Yisrael. And that's it. For those who observe Chag Sameach and Kol Tov.